Well, good morning. Welcome back to Beers with Ben. Today we've got Allagash's White. It's Belgian style beer. Supposed to have coriander and curacao orange peel in it. I honestly can't taste it in there. It's just kind of a standard Belgian style, which I'm a big fan of Belgian style beers, but I've had better than this, to tell you the truth, but whatever. So today we are going to talk about number 24, which is titled Anima, the Second Eve. So this one uh, ties directly in with chapter 23, Anima, the First Adam. Um, in a lot of ways, it's definitely a different song, but it uh, ties in directly with what's going on. And so to talk about the music first, um, with the lyrical theme of this song, I had to have it be just heavy, like super heavy, super dark. Um, and I guess there's some lighter sections of it, or maybe, right? But yeah, I wanted it to be super heavy and super dark for the most part. Um, it's probably not the heaviest song on the album, but I would definitely categorize it as like the second heaviest, and that's for very good reason. Um, and really, the only other thing that I want to point out with this song in particular is the ending breakdown. So there's like this myth, if you will, that the Dillinger escape plan, when they would hit like a brick wall or whatever in writing their music, that they would use like some sort of dice to like come up with a time signature sort of thing. Um, and they would just like roll the dice and it come up with whatever, and they would write a song based off of these like random dice rolls, which is, yeah, it's not, from what I can find, it never, that never happened. I'm sure there's probably other bands out there that have done something like that, but anyway, I knowing that myth, I decided when I was writing the ending breakdown that I wanted to do something like that, and not necessarily with like the time signature, but what I did was I got a standard D6 dice and rolled it, I think, 6 times, and based on that, that was like how many hits or whatever of the guitar um, I would do for, because it's just this, kind of like one note breakdown sort of thing, while there's this other, ambient uh, guitar part kind of going on in the background. And that's, yeah, that's how I wrote that ending breakdown. And I'm not sure what kind of time signature it's in, but I'm sure it's definitely just a weird time signature, just based on those D6 rolls. And I remember I had to re roll it one time because it was like I had something like three three rolls in a row or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I, re-rolled it again, and it came up with a different number. But pretty much, I wrote that just based off of random D6 rolls. And so I thought that was cool, at least. Maybe I'm just kind of nerdy like that, but yeah, it worked. So, Anima, the second Eve, the title, of course, already talked about, Jung and anima in his psychoanalytic theory yesterday. But the second Eve, you know, I came up with this theory or whatever. It just sort of dawned on me a few years back, kind of during that whole season of time dealing with, the grief and, my mentor being gone and all that sort of stuff. And it just sort of hit me one day that in the Bible, specifically the New Testament, points out, the difference between the first Adam and the second Adam. But there's never mention of anything, with a second Eve. And it occurred to me one day that it is there. It's just kind of hidden in context and everything. And so, I mean, obviously we have the first Eve, the Eve character of Genesis, the proto-woman, if you will. But there's never specifically a mention of there being a second Eve, yet I saw that she's there in the New Testament through and through. And the way that I liken it is that, or at least the way that I see it personally, is that first Adam, second Adam applies more to the individual, whereas speaking of the first Eve or the second Eve, to me has more of a connotation of the collective. And so, for example, when we're talking about, the first Adam and sin nature and stuff like that, we're talking about how it affects all of us as individuals. But when dealing with the concept of Eve, we're actually talking more about like the nation state. Specifically, the way I see it is in the Old Testament, this can apply to, the nation of Israel, or perhaps even some of the other nations of the time, whether it be any of these neighboring Mesopotamian, nation states that, no longer exist. Whether you could see the Babylonian or Assyrian empires that way, or Egypt or whatever. It's just, but yeah, I kind of see it more in the lines of, ancient Israel. Whereas in the New Testament, we see what can only, call it the second Eve, which would, be the church, the bride, that sort of thing. And so that the idea of this collective of believers on the foundation of, the second Adam is supposed to appear different than, previous nation states. It's actually supposed to transcend national borders and things of that. That's why, the creeds talk about the church universal and stuff like that. But it's the idea of, this perfected Eve, this perfected collective that we can all be a part of. And so that's kind of weird to say, oh, I'm referencing like it's self-referential to this idea that I have, but um, that's that's what the title refers to, even though like I admit that this song actually has less to do with individualism or collectivism. Like that wasn't part of anything that I wanted to deal with in this song, because in some ways, you know, chapter 23, the first Adam, deals with mental health issues, but from more of an external standpoint, I guess. Whereas this song, The Second Eve, is much more from an internal standpoint. And so, what's happening in the story of this song, really simply put, the protagonist has a mental breakdown, I guess. I mean, since this is, you know, a fictitious world and fictitious story, um, you, I can make the argument that um, that what's happening here isn't just a figment of his imagination or anything like that, but um, yeah, he is kind of having a mental breakdown of sorts, and by the end, well, in the middle of the song, another character shows up, but as to whether or not this character is real is what makes that whole point up for debate. Because what happens is this figment or ghost shows up, and it's a person from his distant past, um, which it's safe to assume that it's the because in chapter 23 he's um, talking about religious upbringing, you know, it being autobiographical in a lot of ways. But like I said, that song is dealing with that whole religious fundamentalism upbringing. That's really the surface point, but like once it gets to the end, it becomes clear that he's actually talking to a specific individual. Um, at least that's the way that I personally wrote it, but I think it will come across to people is that he's talking to like institutional churches or religion or whatever. Um, and so really he's he's talking to both in that song, but in this song, the ghost of whoever he's talking to in the first Adam shows up, and it never says who that person is. All we know is that it's just someone from his past, and I'm just going to leave it with that, um, because it's designed to kind of be misleading in that way, but that is exactly what's going on. So this ghost shows up and takes over this internal monologue that he's having with himself and what he's dealing with, because he's like I mean, this is kind of his lowest point where he's losing himself to his own mental duress, and this ghost character takes over, whether it's an actual ghost or whether it's just a figment of his own psychosis. This ghost takes over and says some really messed up stuff. And at that point, at the very end of the song, hitting rock bottom, he passes out into sleep. and that's the story of this song. But the personal meaning is, once again, it's more autobiographical. And the I have to point out that the ghost character doesn't represent anybody. Like the the first Adam represents church and stuff like that, institutional religion, like I said, but also deals with this specific mental health thing that came up around me. And a lot of what that song deals with represents specific things pertaining to that. But you would think that in this song, this ghost showing up would um, represent that situation, but the opposite is true. It doesn't at all. Instead, the ghost um, actually represents in this song my own issues and my own. I like to think of it as the ghost represents the things in the back of my head that say, oh, you're not good enough, or you're going to fail, or you're not, it represents that sort of thing, not necessarily psychosis or anything like that, but just that darkness that says you'll never be good enough, or whatever. That sort of self-talk, if you want to call it that. Um, just that inner voice that all of us have. Every single one of us has that going on in our psyches of, and many Christians will say, well, that's just the devil talking to you, and maybe that's true. Yet at the same time, I think that for most of us, we all have to struggle with that inner voice that tells us that part of our own psyches, that, whether you want to call it, like the shadow persona or something like that. Once again, reference to Carl Jung and his ideas. We just all have to deal with that sort of thing. So autobiographically, what happened was, so that mental health situation from chapter 23, after a few months, was coming to a close. It was a slow process, but it was definitely at this point coming to a close. And then it was a Saturday. I want to say it was like in April or May of 2017. It had already been 3 or 4 months since my mentor had passed. And I was just hanging out, woke up, early Saturday morning, and decided, hey, I'm going to work on some music, and plugged everything in, dialed everything in, and was recording guitars for volume 1. And I don't remember what song I was working on or anything like that. It would have been early on, so I could probably narrow it down to a few handful of songs that it could have possibly been. But point is, I was working on some of those songs, and it was like the middle of the afternoon, and I started to notice that I had this weird feeling going on in my sinuses. It was it was like I felt like something was like stuck or lodged up deep inside my nose. And like no matter how much I blew my nose or anything, like nothing was going on for it, loosening or whatever. But I just kind of kept going and ignored it and just kind of figured, well, maybe I'm starting to develop allergies or something like that, because I had never dealt with allergies really ever before that. Um, so late that afternoon, I like went and got late lunch or something, and went to this gaming shop that I used to go to all the time to play some HeroClix tournaments or whatever, and started playing games with some friends and all like that. And just the more it progressed into the evening and everything and playing the games, the worse that I started to feel. Just feeling sluggish and like I was coming down with a cold or something like that. And just really sluggish was what I was really starting to feel. And just, I don't want to say like I felt congestion or anything like that in my head, but just a lot of it was kind of manifesting, I guess, in my sinuses and all. And I left there and went by like a Wendy's or something to get dinner, and got dinner and got in my car and started heading home. And usually I would just like sit down and eat dinner in Wendy's or whatever, but because I was starting to feel so rough, I was just like, I just want to make it home and eat dinner there and stuff like that. But the further along that I drove towards home, which from like Wendy's to home is like, I don't know, a 15-minute drive or something like that. Not very far. But the more sluggish I began feeling, like to the degree that I wouldn't say I was like feeling drunk or something like that, but maybe that's the closest thing that I can kind of compare it to. Like by the time that I was 2 minutes from the house, I started to realize like I haven't drank anything all day. I haven't drank anything all week, but I feel like I shouldn't be driving right now. Like if I got pulled over, they would probably think that I was high or something, because I'm starting to feel that messed up, that sick or whatever. But like this isn't a cold or anything like that. Like I felt like my mental capabilities were starting to slow down, and I luckily pulled in the driveway, got in the house, sat down with my dinner, and like ate maybe a third of what I had, which that, like, I eat my food, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a growing boy, and me just like eating a couple of bites of a burger and maybe like a third of a Wendy's salad and being like, I don't feel like eating anymore. Like that's not like me at all. And all I could think about was, I just want to go to bed. And mind you, this was at like 8:30 at night on a Saturday night. Like it was super early. And so put everything in the refrigerator, went to my bedroom, laid down, and I was like, finally I'm in my bed, and I can go to sleep and I'll wake up tomorrow and probably feel a lot better. That's all I was thinking about. And within like 5 minutes of laying in bed trying to go to sleep, it hit me. I've only had this happen twice in my life, and this was the very first time it happened. Um, so back in, I don't know, 2016, which I may have talked about this in some of the volume one posts. Now, I had for a month or two, um, I dealt with like, I guess, acute anxiety issues. Just had some realizations about myself and just being alone, lack of like intimacy and stuff like that in my life. Started having these like anxiety issues for a time, and it lasted maybe a month and a half. Would kind of periodically come on, um, and then it just went away, sort of thing. And what happened to me on this night wasn't anything like that. It wasn't anxiety. I can deal with anxiety fairly well. Even if I'm like having like anxiety issues, I can still like deal with being in public places or having conversations with people or whatever. Um, Anxiety is, I mean, I don't have it like all the time, but I deal with it enough that I just know how to kind of deal with it. I don't know how to put it more simply than that. But what happened this evening was what I can only describe as like a full-scale panic attack. I don't know what brought it on. Maybe like now I have issues with like allergies and everything. I have like year-round allergies, and honestly, if any of you saw me through like February of 2020 through like uh, maybe around a year ago, I was dealing with severe allergy issues pretty much the entire time. Some days it would be better than others, but um, like I have bad allergies. Dust and cockroaches and stuff like that will set me off pretty bad. Where like I have severe like post-nasal drip, I guess. My like sinuses basically become a balloon, and it will start like affecting my ears, like my inner ear pressure and stuff like that too. So I mean, maybe it's possible that I was having some sort of allergic reaction before, you know, these like chronic allergies started manifesting. I don't know. Or maybe it was because I've been under so much stress and grief that my body just finally had enough of it and just hit a hard reset or something like that. But regardless of what caused it, I had this severe panic attack. And so half of like the first part of this song is me trying to put in words what happened to me, of having this panic attack. And just to quote myself in this song, I say, this illness is less than a fog. A cloud would be substance, while this is a void of cognition, memory abysmal, speech absent. This is less than disorganization, only nothingness. What what happened to me was I I lost most of like any what you would I guess call like higher cognitive functions. Um, I couldn't think like at all. I felt like I was losing myself, my identity, what makes me me altogether. If you asked me what's your name, it would have probably taken me 20 seconds to tell you my name's Benjamin because I was unable to hold a thought. But like at the same time, it was like being overloaded and having like a million thoughts kind of happening at once, but none of it stuck and none of it was anything substantial at the same time. And I don't know how to explain it better than that because it's just weird. But I could feel, this issue going on in my sinuses, and I was laying in bed, and all I could think was, I need to get up, and I've got a neti pot, and I need to, like flush out my sinuses. There's something going on up there, maybe it'll help. But because I couldn't keep a thought down, it took me about 15 minutes just to climb out of my bed and get to the kitchen to like grab the neti pot. Like that's how out of it I was. Something that should have taken me less than 30 seconds to do took me like an entire 15 minutes because I couldn't keep a thought, you know, in mind. And I was pretty much alone through most of it. Um, and what ended up happening at one point was as I was losing myself and the ability to think or to recall anything, literally the only thing that was going on in my head was kind of a fight or flight sort of thing. I mean, like, bare minimum, very foundation of it, anything, it was me realizing, like, I think I'm dying right now because of what's happening to me, and I can't think, and I'm dying. This must be me dying. And literally I was oscillating between the terror of the thought of death and then acceptance of it. Be like I would be for 10 seconds completely just laying there in bed terrified that I'm gonna die any second now, and then just snapping over to, oh, okay, whatever. And then being, oh, no, like, this is real. Like, I'm dying right now. I don't want to die. I want to live. I'm scared. And then snapping over to, who cares? Like, at least I won't be suffering anymore and this will be over with and whatever. And it just was a seesaw back and forth between terror and acceptance. And eventually, I guess I just passed out. And I don't know for how long, but it wasn't for, I know for a fact it wasn't for very long. It maybe was 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I don't know. But the next thing I remember was jolting awake and like looking over at my alarm clock, and I was cognizant at that point, and it was only like maybe 9:30 or something like that in the evening, and I was like, holy shit, what just happened to me? And I, sat up in bed and was just sitting there trying to gain myself and like I said, when I woke up, I was cognizant, everything was fine, but within like a couple of minutes of being awake again, it came back with this like panic attack. And I think that was like when I like went to go to the kitchen or something like that. I went to the bathroom, stuff like that, and it took me like 20 minutes just to like make it up a stairway to like do that sort of thing. Um, and just realizing too that like I was on, I guess, the verge of delirium at that point. And so yeah, that's the story behind this song, was that I was trying to describe having, my first panic attack. And like I said, I've only had it happen twice to me. And the other time that it happened was like 9 months later. And it happened for really no reason. It was kind of the same thing, like happened on a Saturday afternoon after I like went and played my board game stuff. But like that time it was not as bad because I realized when it was coming on, what was happening, that I was having a panic attack, and I was like, screw this, I'm just going to go to bed. There's nothing I can really do about it. Um, Even if I'm terrified, like I know I'm going to be okay. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm just going to sleep this off. And that's what I did. Woke up the next day, and I remember I went to church, and at the time there was this guy who was this like physician that I knew, um, and I pulled him aside because like I knew his wife and stuff. Like we played music together for a short time, and like his daughter and stuff like that. And I usually wouldn't like just ask somebody about this kind of stuff if I don't really know them well, but like I was like, well, this guy's probably pretty trustworthy, since I guess know his family or whatever. So described what happened to him, and he was like, maybe you had an allergic reaction or a panic attack or something like that. It's difficult to say, but if it happens again, just keep some Benadryl or something around, or you might want to supplement your diet with like B12 vitamins or whatever. And I haven't had it happen in like 4.5 years, so I guess I'm doing all right. But at the end of the song, the ghost character, takes over and starts talking to the main character, and really the ghost character personifies both that like terror of feeling like you're dying, but also deals with like my fears, and yeah, like the personification of my fears during that time in my life. And I say, I make reference that I'll just read it off. It says, "You're just like me, your first Eve." So that being sort of synonymous with first Adam sort of thing, that like this ghost character saying you're no different from me sort of thing. And it says, "Didn't you rest beneath my ribs after I was breathed life, a surgery of my Adam's rib." So going back to the creation accounts in Genesis. And like in the actual song, I pitch shift vocals and make it sound really kind of creepy, but just like the anima, this feminine concept, it says, didn't you suffer a Cassandra complex? Which that goes back into like Greek mythos, that like Cassandra, however it's said, was this like prophetess in Greek myth, and she makes all these predictions, which, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like I think it had to deal with like the fall of Troy. It, I want to say it was the fall of Troy. She like made the predictions of that happening and warns. Anyway, she, as this like prophetess or seer or whatever you want to call her, she warns everybody that this is going to happen, and everybody like mocks her and doesn't believe her. And so like Cassandra complex, I guess like in psychology or whatever, is when somebody has this like prediction and it actually ends up coming true, but like everybody thinks you're basically full of shit. So it is the ghost character saying, like, recognizing that, hey, the protagonist of the story had this idea, this I don't know, like, don't want to necessarily call it a something prophetic or anything like that, but definitely sees something, I guess, going to take place. And specifically in here it says, didn't you suffer a Cassandra complex, seer of a second Adam, after blood and water spilt from his pierced side? So referring to Jesus. And then in a grave produced a bride cleansed by his rib. Didn't you see a second Eve, yet none believed? So that's how I saw myself at the time of like dealing with the woman I wanted to marry and my mentor and everything, was that I had, I guess, vision, if you want to call it that, not like an actual vision, but more like an ideation of this bride, this New Jerusalem, but like here on earth, and with people that I knew, and with myself, and that, just this call to action of, hey, let's be greater than just mere human beings. And people thought I was full of shit, and everything that, like, I guess I had predicted and was afraid of happening kind of ended up happening, because like eventually the church I was a part of dissolved, and I lost, all this contact with the woman I loved, and my mentor was passed away, and everything fell apart. And even like having issues with like some of my friends at the time. And so this ghost character points this stuff out, becomes a personification of everything that I had predicted and tried to fight against and feared happening. And this ghost saying, you're forgotten, but I have idols. Isn't she and you more of a harlot than me? Going back into issues of Gomer and stuff with Ezekiel that, I mentioned back in the previous song. And her, this anima character, this ghost saying, taste depression and descend into panic and the sleep of the shadow of fucking death. I'm sure that'll offend some people, but I make no apologies for it once again. I don't want to just needlessly drop an F-bomb into a song like this. Um, but what actually happened in the recording process, excuse me, what actually happened was one night I was coming to the end of this song and specifically recording the breakdown section, just screaming my freaking head off. And I'd been recording for, a little while. My voice was shredded at that point, like completely shredded. And I was screaming the end, recording it, and giving it all I had. And like emotionally, I was just getting really into it. Like, pissed off, angry, and just really feeling that ending. And I got to the very last lines and realized that like the breakdown pretty much hit the last note, and I still had like 6 or 7 words to scream through, like basically the entire last line. I had gone over the time, and I was really trying to get all of the lyrics into this last line, and I'd gone over, which the like rough draft recording for this song's actually a little longer. It's got more lyrics to it, and because of this that happened there, being over the time, like I ended up re-editing it like earlier this year and cutting out words that didn't need to be there and stuff like that to make it easier on myself and recording and having less lyrics, without actually taking away from the song itself. It was just taking away like unnecessary words and phrases. But anyway, I got to the end, and most of the time I would just hit stop, delete that track, and redo it. But since I was just like really into it, and I just kept going, and I was like super intense and super angry and super frustrated with myself, because I knew, from just pushing my voice and how like emotional and angry I was, and in the moment, I knew that like it was basically a perfect take. And, I'm just screaming this last line, and all of this stuff is just like me reacting immediately in the moment. And out of that frustration, I scream, the shadow of fucking death. It wasn't, the F word fuck was not in the lyrics at all. It was just me being pissed off and frustrated with myself, and that take, not nailing it, the timing down at the end, that I just let it fly. And finishing that line, song was finished, hit, stop and record, and usually I would just delete that, that recording track and just rewind and redo it again. But I knew that like the tone of my voice and my scream was like on point, even though like my voice was fried. So I just wanted to, re-listen to it, just to hear, how amazing my voice sounded, and just try to take, I guess, mental notes of like, this is how I can redo that and get the same tone. But as I re-listened to it and got to that very in line, shadow of fucking death, I was like, holy crap, this hits hard. This hits close to home. Like, it sounds amazing and everything, and it ran over the timing, but it actually works. And adding that F-bomb into it really nails down the tone lyrically of like, this is the rock bottom. This is like the full weight of this panic attack and the mental breakdown. And so right then and there I was like, okay, I guess I'm not re-recording this. And I kept that track. I was like, okay, I'm finished, which of course I re-recorded it once I had the drums and stuff down. But at that point it was like, well, as a Christian, do I leave this F-bomb in there because it's going to offend people if I leave it or whatever. And maybe one day I'll have to repent and be like, my bad, Jesus. But I don't know. I think it works. This isn't supposed to be a pretty song at all. And I know I've said that about certain tracks in, volume 1 and all, but like this song especially is supposed to be heavy and dark, and I just can't make any apologies for it, because like having that kind of panic attack when you're afraid that, oh, I'm gonna die and like nobody's gonna care kind of thing. I mean, whether that's truth or not, which obviously it isn't truth, but that isn't the point. The point is like you're having this panic attack and you feel that, and if I'm going to be honest about that sort of thing, I can't beat around the bush. Like, this has to be real. So that's the story behind this song. And if you're somebody who is watching this and deals with that sort of thing on a regular basis, I don't know what to tell you. It sucks. Because this isn't something you have control over. Maybe there's medications that your psychiatrist can subscribe to, to you, prescribe. But it's scary when these kind of things happen and you have absolutely no control over it. And I think a lot of Christians out there within the charismatic and Pentecostal traditions that I come from don't understand that at all, of not having control. And I think a lot of times it's easy to just pigeonhole people, when it comes to mental health issues, if you don't understand that, you have to show people grace when it comes to that sort of stuff, because you're not dealing with typical rules of psychology or whatever. You're dealing with things that are beyond control, and you can't just willpower your way out of having a panic attack. It just doesn't work that way. And so I guess I can dedicate this to anybody who has gone through a similar issue, and in the moment it may feel like you're completely alone in it, but I guess you're not. So take that, for what you will, and cheers. And tomorrow we'll be dealing with chapter 25 and progressing through this story from here.